Welcome, everyone, to the Planet MicroCap Showcase Vancouver. I'm your host, Robert Kraft, and I'm pleased to bring you our next virtual keynote. And doing this keynote today is Jon Uretsky. He's the founding partner at PULLP, PULLP. It is a law firm which specializes in microcap litigation. So as you can expect, what you're going to hear in this keynote presentation here is about that entire world. So Jon is actually one of the handful of attorneys that specializes in microcap litigation, and he's even come to known by the moniker as the microcap litigator. So with that, let's learn everything there is to know about what's going on in microcap litigation and everything having to do with that. So with that, Jon, take it away.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I hope this will be a helpful presentation for everyone. It's called Try Not to Give the Regulators a Head Start. And even before I begin, I kind of want to give credit where credit is due for what made me actually come up with this topic. And this topic was, without him realizing it, the brainchild of a guy named Shelley Kraft. If you're watching this, I think you're familiar with the guy. He actually helped us come up with one of our advertisements, which is that PULP is the law firm that you don't need until you do. And I agreed with that, and we promoted ourselves that way. Here's the thing. Most clients are actually not aware that they need us at the time that they do. Most clients mistakenly believe that they don't need us until well after they do. And it's mistakes like that that have caused a lot more difficulty for a number of our clients, which is what caused me to think that this would be a good idea of a topic to cover today. So let's get into it. The table of contents, the itinerary for what we are going to talk about today. First, I'm going to briefly introduce the firm. Then, to really get into it, those pre-complaint mistakes, and then the post-complaint consequences, which is what I just mentioned. So first, I just want to address the law firm itself. And PULP is now 19 years old, coming up on 20 next year. I hope everyone watching this can join me at the big 20-year party. It's going to be a lot of fun. And what PULP has evolved into, I personally have been working in the field for about 25 years. PULP has become effectively a microcap securities litigation boutique specialty firm. And what that means is that we do securities litigation, almost only securities litigation, and almost only for the players in the microcap space. Normally, this is when I would have to explain what that means. I'm guessing that for this audience, that won't be a problem. If you're watching this, you're in the microcap space. If you get sued, if there's any kind of litigation that you're aware of, we are one of the very small handful of firms that can help you. Now, the issue that we have encountered time and time again, and until Shelley put it in my head, I guess I didn't realize it, is sometimes we have a case that we're presented with where the regulators kind of have a head start. And it's not because they're the government, and it's not because they have more staff or more money to put towards it than your typical microcap company does. It's because there are baked into the case that usually the SEC, it could be FINRA, but that the regulator has are gifts given to it by the people who walk in the door as our clients. Obviously, you don't want to do that. Now, when someone does walk in the door, one of the very first questions that we will always ask is, what is your true appetite for litigation? If you're watching this and you are one of my former clients, you know I've asked you that question. Now, this is why this comes up. You're going to hear the whole reason this matters. But it starts with the premise, and this is true. I've now been doing this 25 years. PULP is almost 20. The next client that tells PULP that they actually did something wrong will be the first. It hasn't happened yet. And honestly, I don't think it's going to happen. No matter what, there's a disconnect. Clients are always convinced that they haven't done anything wrong. If you start with that as a premise and you have no appetite for litigation, you often run into problems, and I'm about to explain why. Here's the thing. Most, and this is a mistake, most clients believe that you don't need a law firm until you get sued. And by the way, it makes sense. I understand why people think that. Why would you need a law firm to help you if there's no lawsuit? It doesn't make sense, right? But it begins way before you know about it. It begins when FINRA or the SEC start approaching people requesting documents or information. And sometimes they don't start with their target. So the problem is the disconnect. The problem, as I just mentioned, is that we have eventual clients and they are convinced that they didn't do anything wrong. And that's why they're also convinced that, well, if they just show all of the documents to the regulators will just drop the case. They're not actually going to sue us. That's what the client comes in and tells me. They're not going to sue us. Once we share everything with them, once they see what actually happened, the regulator will know that they're barking up the wrong tree. They'll say, the truth will set me free, happens all the time. And that the regulators will say, sorry, I didn't mean it. Hope you have a good day, and walk away. On the other hand, you have the regulators, and they're convinced that clients have committed serious, often crimes, in violating securities rules and laws. And in the regulators' minds, the clients are actually very lucky that it's only them and not, the United States Attorney's Office or another prosecutor coming, because that would have criminal consequences. So the regulators think they're doing you a favor by only putting you out of business and only asking for money. So you have clients on the one hand, I didn't do anything wrong, regulators are about to drop the case, regulators on the other. I'm doing them a favor by not putting them behind bars. This is where problems come into play, because there's a huge amount of sort of timeline that occurs way before the regulators actually file a complaint. We refer to this here at PULLP as the pre-complaint timeline. Now, most cases do settle during this procedural phase. I'm going to just take it as a given that anyone who wants to settle a case, you would all prefer it be for as little as possible, right? That's a given. You don't want to either pay more money or agree to more limitations on your life than you have to. That's not usually what occurs, but that's the goal, you would think. Now, why is that not what occurs? And it's because the investigations often start before anyone knows about it. Typically, FINRA or the SEC will actually start with subpoenas sent to others involved. So let's take this as an example. If you're a public company and you have a bank account at Chase, they're not going to start with you. They're going to start by sending a subpoena to Chase. And maybe they'll take testimony from your transfer agent. There's a lot of other parties who are involved in the microcap securities space besides the actual targets. Similarly, a lot of the times they're looking at the financing. And so perhaps it was a family office, perhaps it was a fund who made a convertible debt loan for paper. And that's really what they're looking at. Are they going to start with the fund? No, they're going to start with the company that's the issuer. And inevitably, there will come a time where the eventual client will know, but they're not going to know at the beginning. So what happens is you'll have subpoenas that are received. They'll be requesting information or documents. And the question is how much to give over. Next, there will be testimony. It's under oath. It's not that different than a lawsuit, a deposition, but it is pre-complaint. There's not even a lawsuit at this time. And then separately, there's something called the Wells process, where you have the opportunity to lay out a defense if you choose to. In the post-complaint timeline, this is not when most settlements occur. Most settlements, as we just said, had already occurred. But after you get sued, there's nothing stopping you from settling. But at the end of the post-complaint timeline is the trial. The big thing that happens is it's now public. And once there's a complaint that's public, there's all kinds of disclosure requirements. But there is an opportunity to start defending yourself. That you do with potentially a motion to dismiss. The parties actually exchange documents and information, meaning this is your first chance to actually see the results of that investigation that I just described that the SEC just did. There'll be depositions again, so you may end up giving testimony twice. This time, it's actually going to matter more because it's in the context of an actual complaint. This testimony is often decisive on the actual motions, both, well, not so much the motion to dismiss that I just mentioned, but the motion for summary judgment, which, as I'll get to, is the SEC's usually, not so much FINRA, but it's the SEC's typical strategy is to try to win there. And then if you get past that, trial, which is not exactly like you see on TV, but that's what you're most familiar with. Now, getting back to the original premise, the clients walk in the door, and so far, 25 years, no client will tell me that they did anything wrong. In reality, this is the tough, you got to swallow it. The clients usually did do something wrong. They maybe aren't nearly as bad people as the regulators will make them out to be. And it's not necessarily that they intended to do something wrong. Being in this space is hard. There's a lot of rules, a lot of laws, a lot of regulations, not a lot of money. So sometimes you make mistakes, you cut corners. There's usually something that went wrong. Otherwise, they're not really likely to be looking at you. Now, all of those ideas that people have, I didn't do anything wrong, the truth is going to set me free. As a result, once I give them all the documents and information, they'll just drop it. I haven't seen that yet. We've once or twice, gotten them to drop things, but it's such a small percentage of the time, it's scary. It is extraordinarily unlikely that a case will be dropped by regulators once all the documents and information are received. Okay, so what does that mean? What happens? Well, if you're using experienced microcap securities litigation counsel, there's going to be sort of a questionnaire, and you're going to be asked about the types of information. In general, there's 4 types of information, and you're going to see that some of it I wouldn't have a problem giving to a regulator, and others I might not want to withhold from a regulator. But this is not, I'm old, this is not like things were in the 90s when I first started, where you actually could get away with hiding, a document. These days, we live in a world, especially in the securities space, where every little thing that happens, if it's an email, there's a version of it somewhere. WhatsApp, also saved. Texts, yes, those are saved. I'm aware of Snapchat, and it doesn't work the way you think it does. They're able to get that too. So you do have to deal with the fact that just about anything that you've done will at some point go to regulators. There's one, and we're getting to it at the end, type that you can make sure that the regulators don't get, but you have to be willing to not share with them to get there. So the 4 types are materials regulators can get from another source. That's in my example where they ask your bank and the bank just gives them something. Then stuff they might get from you, non-hurtful materials that they will be able to get eventually. I just said they can get almost anything eventually. If it helps you, you may as well just give it over because they're going to get it in, say, 6 to 8 months anyway. Then there's the hurtful materials. Those are the ones I just said you don't want to give over, but we're not, in the 80s and 90s anymore. You can't really hide documents the way you once could. In all likelihood, the regulators are going to get those eventually. It's more of a question about when you give it out and how you give it out and how you can best, posture, hide it. Those are some strategy decisions that really you need to discuss with counsel. But the most important point for this presentation, this is where a lot of clients make mistakes. It's about materials that the regulators ask you to create. By definition, these are not materials the regulators can get from another source or from you. If it doesn't exist, let's say, hey, can you make me a timeline of every single decision that you made in putting together the false and misleading press releases for which I'm about to sue you? Don't. Free legal advice there. Don't. If the regulators are asking you to create something, you do it if it is, and only if it is, a part of an already agreed to settlement. Otherwise, what you're doing, as you'll see later, is giving them a head start. Who's watched Law and Order here? Who's watched any other cop show? Who's watched any other law show? At some point, you will see someone getting arrested. When you see that, whether it's the FBI or the cops, you're going to see them give what are known as Miranda right warnings. And the part that you need to actually pay attention to, because it's real, is anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Well, guess what? Anything you tell or give to the SEC or FINRA can and will be used against you. Don't create more for them. But it happens all the time. Now, why? When I just put it like that, it seems just no one would ever do that, right? Except it happens all the time. So why do clients make this mistake? And it really comes down to two possible, options. The first being the practical choice. We're dealing with microcap companies here. There's just funding issues all the time. If you're trying to keep your company in business and you're trying to pay your people, you sometimes might not have enough money to fund the defense. We don't work for free. We're certainly cheaper than all the big law firms, but a lot of microcap companies simply can't afford to fund experienced microcap securities lit counsel, and they're making their own choices and their own decisions, and they're going to make mistakes. That happens, and actually that I can understand, and there's only so much you can do about that. It's a business decision, and you have to prioritize what matters. It's the second group of people that we can try to fix with this presentation. This is the purely mental question. Many people just don't believe that the case won't be dropped if all the information is handed over. Everything that I just said, they're stuck on that original point. I didn't do anything wrong. The truth will set me free. If I give the SEC or FINRA everything that there is to know about this, they'll read it and drop it. They'll walk away, say, sorry, have a nice day. And the difference between winning and losing the case often comes down to that pretrial error. That error that I just described. Because when people believe that, they make that mental mistake, then what they do, and it makes sense based on their misguided logic, they provide all the information requested pre-trial, and they even often create documents and information for the regulators to use against them. Inevitably, this will hurt later on in summary judgment and at trial. Getting back to that question that I ask every single client, is being sued as bad as losing? What I mean by that is, right now, when you first walk in the door, there's no complaint yet. We're in the pre-complaint stage. You don't necessarily need to disclose anything. If you settle right now, maybe you'll get a good settlement, maybe not. But will your company fold if it is sued? Meaning just the SEC suing you and the disclosures that come with that, the bad PR that comes with that, does that effectively end your company anyway? If so, you need to settle before the complaint, and that changes the strategy. That's why you need to ask yourself this decision right away. Let's say, no, it doesn't mean the end of the world. We could defend ourselves if we absolutely need to. Nobody really wants to be sued, but if the SEC or FINRA is asking for too much, then you defend. Well, I've done it enough times. I've been doing this a really long time. The SEC won't disagree with this. Some would just for the fun of it, but realistically, their strategy is always the same. Once you file a complaint, they're all about the law. They're rarely about the facts. Their goal is to win on summary judgment and not to have to go to trial. Which means you need to make it extraordinarily difficult for the SEC to win on summary judgment. And easier said than done. I mean, it's really hard to do. It's very complicated, but to dumb it down, you need to dispute the testimony. You need to dispute the documents. You probably are going to want some experts, and you're going to need to distinguish cases. This is where really You need the most experienced securities litigation microcap counsel, but you also need to have not created mistakes that take away these defenses later on. Imagine that you now have that experienced securities litigation counsel ready to do those 4 things I just said. And that's when we find out, can't do it. No, can't do it. Sorry, I made a bunch of mistakes originally before I hired you pre-complaint. It happens more than you think. They can use that against you to win their summary judgment motion, in which case you've just lost your case. But let's say we get past that. Then you go to trial. Those same mistakes that we're about to discuss can be used against you at trial. What are those mistakes? So in the Wells process, this is where it really comes out. The Wells process is a process that was created after a guy named Mr. Wells about 50 years ago to try to get settlements to occur. And it's good for everyone when you want the settlement, as long as you do it right. There's a whole process that involves a Wells letter, a Wells response, a Wells call, and then that settlement. In the Wells letter, the SEC sends a letter that reveals their case. It doesn't. Every single case is about the same in the securities field. We're supposed to make it sound like rocket science, but really there's like 2 laws, the 33 Act and the 34 Act. That's what they're going to disclose has been broken. I already can tell you what those are, and I don't even know who you are. Now, the SEC having shared that with the clients now feel that, oh, we owe the SEC a response. They read this as the SEC being willing to work with them. That is not the case. There ought to be a lot of consideration given to not giving a Wells response. Again, whatever you say can and will be used against you. You're given an opportunity, however, to respond with up to 50 pages of information. A lot of people want to use that opportunity. It's not always a good idea. And what we've often seen is 50 single-spaced, really like they make it as small as possible. They increase the margins, they make the font really small, and they give extraordinarily detailed explanations of exactly what they did wrong. This means you can't later dispute those things as an issue of fact on summary judgment. If you remember the 4 points on how you get past summary judgment, you need to be able to dispute things. Well, if you write them 50 pages, now they'll use that against you and they'll say, no, that's not disputed. Look at page 27 where he admitted it. It will be used against you. After that, there's usually what's called a Wells call. This is the face-to-face portion of it. Used to be in person, now it's actually a Zoom. At the end of the day, this is usually when clients realize, oh, they're not actually just going to walk away and say, thank you, have a nice day. It's too late to really do defense work here. That doesn't occur. At this point, if you're here, everything has already been revealed to the SEC in writing in that Wells response. So it's too late. They're going to sue you. Or if you've done it the right way, you've already reached a decent settlement. So what would that settlement look like? And it depends about the mistakes that you've made thus far. If you haven't made mistakes, you're going to have more leverage. It's not that they're going to just go away. They're probably not. But if the SEC thinks they still have to beat you at trial, they're likely to give you a better deal. If you answer my question, how bad is it to get sued with I must settle now? If you're going to settle anyway, you should always settle for less. Counterintuitively, apparently, this happens through not giving the SEC or FINRA as much as they ask for. There's a lot to unpack with what I just said. I'm not going to pretend that you're all suddenly experts in this. There are very, very few attorneys who actually do this regularly. Full-time, I think PULLP might be the only law firm out there that actually specializes in nothing but this. We have a number of attorneys who do nothing but this. I'm one of them. Please feel free to contact us for a complimentary analysis. There you see my email. You also see the firm phone number. The firm website is pulp.com. And you can probably see it's you'll get a free mug if you stop by. We'd love to see you. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope that you got something out of this. Again, I want to say thank you to Bobby for giving me the opportunity to be here. And I appreciate all of you. I hope you have a great time at the conference. Wish I could have been there in Vancouver as well.
Thank you so much, Jon, for your presentation today. See you soon.
Thank you, Bobby.